The best gift would be if you died. Those words didn't come from a stranger, but from my own daughter. I froze, as if someone had pulled the floor out from under me. The air in the room grew heavy, difficult to breathe, and for a moment I thought I might faint. She smiled, not a nervous smile, but a smile of certainty. I knew it wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a cold, calculated wish that revealed something much deeper than simple ingratitude. My heart pounded, not only from the pain of rejection, but from the danger hidden behind that sentence. What did my death really mean to her? An end to suffering? Or the beginning of a more comfortable life for someone who never lifted a finger for me? It was like seeing the tip of an iceberg and knowing the most lethal part was still submerged. In that moment, all the small insults and heavy silences took on new meaning. The invitations that never arrived. The sidelong glances, scrutinizing my clothes, my hair, my mannerisms. The contempt disguised as family jokes. All of this now seemed to be rehearsing that cruel moment. I wasn't just unwanted. I was disposable. My mind raced in circles trying to understand. When a daughter wishes her own mother dead, what is she really seeking? An inheritance? Freedom? Or simply to be free of the presence that bothers her? The question burned inside me like a hot iron. It's strange how life can become a stacked deck. I always thought I was playing fair, relying on my family for shelter. But I realized, too late, that the tables had been stacked against me. I was the card everyone wanted to eliminate. And yet, within this abyss, a spark ignited. A silent but firm voice told me that this would not be the end for me. That there was still something within me capable of turning destiny upside down. Little did my daughter know that by wishing me dead, she had just taught me how to be reborn. My daughter's words still echoed within me, like a slow poison coursing through my veins. I sat in the armchair and looked around the room, trying to find some detail that would bring me back to reality. The crooked picture on the wall, the worn-out rug, the clock ticking unhurriedly. Everything seemed ordinary, but the silence carried an invisible violence. It was as if every object was witnessing my downfall, complicit in a scene I never imagined I would experience. I ran my hand over the arm of the chair, feeling the rough texture of the fabric. It was the same chair I'd rocked my daughter in as a baby, on cold mornings when she'd only slept in my lap. The memory pierced me like a razor. The contrast between what we'd been and what she'd just said was too cruel. How could yesterday's affection turn into today's poison? The pain wasn't just in the words, but in what they hid. 'Cause no one says something like that by accident. Behind that phrase were plans, intentions, perhaps even haste. And I realized it wasn't just about rejection, but about survival. My death was convenient, and I, alive, was an obstacle. As I thought about this, I felt a chill run down my spine. Life sometimes reveals itself as a narrow corridor, with doors that close one after another, until only a narrow, suffocating path remains. That's how I felt, cornered by my own daughter, as if I no longer had a place or right to exist. But at the same time, something inside me refused to accept this fate. A thread of dignity, invisible and stubborn, began to move. It's this same thread that so many people hold onto when they hear stories like mine, which is why so many choose to stay here, following each revelation, because they know that life can change in a matter of seconds. I didn't cry then. I didn't give her the pleasure of seeing my tears. I just stood there, letting the silence become a shield. But inside me, something was beginning to awaken, like a flame hidden beneath the ashes. And it was in that moment that I realized, if she believed my death would be a gift, then it was time to show her that I still had a lot to offer, and it wouldn't be anything like what she expected. The silence that followed that sentence wasn't just a lack of sound, but a suffocating weight that filled every corner of the house. I could hear my own heartbeat racing as if trying to escape my chest. She, on the other hand, seemed peaceful, almost relaxed, as if a weight had finally been lifted from her shoulders. The contrast between us was brutal. Me torn apart inside, and she calm, observing me with a calmness that made me even more frightened. The following days became a minefield. Her every gesture carried a shadow, Every word seemed calculated. It wasn't just the cruelty of the words. It was the certainty that something was stirring behind the scenes, like an underground river, invisible, but one day overflowing and swallowing everything around it. I began to notice signs that would have previously gone unnoticed. Whispered conversations on the phone, secret glances exchanged, an unusual haste in discussing documents, bills, and paperwork. My mind whirled, trying to piece it together. Death wasn't just a wish, it was an opportunity. I began to see that I wasn't facing a momentary whim, but a plot in which my life was the obstacle to be removed. And when this realization hit me, the air seemed to drain from the room. At night, I would sit alone in the kitchen, the dim light illuminating only the table. The contrast was almost symbolic. A room filled with memories of care, now transformed into a space of fear. The steam from the kettle rose slowly, curling through the air, as if reminding me that even within the darkness, something still tried to rise. I tried to find hope, but it came broken, fragmented like glass on the floor. At the same time, there was a strength born of fear, a kind of silent resistance. Because when danger approaches, every detail of the world becomes clearer. The creak of a door, the glint of a glance, even the touch of a warm cup in my hands. Everything seemed to warn me that I needed to prepare. And it was in this state of alert that I began to realize what was at stake was not just my place in the family, but my very existence. There was something bigger at work, something that didn't yet have a clear form, but which I sensed would soon reveal itself. In those days of enforced silence, I found myself noticing things that had previously gone unnoticed. The sound of the key turning in the door, the way she avoided my gaze at the table, the haste with which she hid her cell phone when I entered the room. They were small signs, but together they formed an invisible wall between us. And within that distance, something grew within me. Not only the pain of rejection, but also a new clarity, almost cruel in its sharpness. One morning, as I was making coffee, the strong smell of coffee powder rising in the air brought back memories of a time when the kitchen was the center of our affection. I remembered how, as a little girl, she would come running clumsily, asking for help stirring the pot, dropping everything and laughing as if the world were too simple to be cruel. The memory cut me deeply, because I realized that this past seemed to have left no roots in her. How is it possible that the love poured out over a lifetime can be lost so easily, like water slipping through fingers? These thoughts consumed me, but they also gave me a strange strength. With each of her cool gestures, I felt a silent resistance growing stronger within me, like a tree trunk that, even when buffeted by the wind, refuses to fall. And perhaps it is at this point that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message touched them, because they know that there are times when even a weary heart needs invisible support. There were nights when I'd sit by the window, staring at the streetlights, trying to imagine another life where the weight wouldn't be so heavy, another version of myself that didn't have to endure the violence disguised as words. These small pauses would let me breathe, even if only for a few seconds, before the tightness in my chest returned. And it was in these pauses that I realized something even more unsettling. Behind the rejection, there was a larger narrative, perhaps something even she herself didn't have the courage to say out loud. As if the words that hurt me were just the surface of a much deeper abyss. I didn't yet know what lay beneath, but I sensed I would soon be forced to look. Sometimes I wondered if the silence I maintained was strength or cowardice. With each cold look from my daughter, each dry word, I felt as if I were walking down a narrow hallway, where every footstep echoed louder than it should. It was like living in a house full of shadows, where even the sound of a glass landing on the table seemed to portend danger. Yet within that same silence, I discovered glimmers of hope. There were moments when I caught myself breathing deeply, as if my body refused to give up. It was a struggle between two worlds, that of pain which pulled me down and that of resistance which pushed me forward. I wavered between them like a candle on a windy night, sometimes nearly extinguished, sometimes flickering but still burning. Memories of the past seeped into those moments. I saw myself holding her small hand on the street, shielding her from cars, hearing her laugh when she discovered something new. These images came back like fragments of an old film, in faded colors, but still vivid enough to cut through. Because it was precisely the memory of love that made rejection so cruel. And as I relived these contrasts, I realized how uncomfortable my own presence had become. I was no longer seen as a mother, but as an obstacle. The pain of this realization was intense, but at the same time, it pushed me to see beyond the obvious. Because when someone desires your absence, what are they really trying to hide? There was something unsaid hovering between us. A secret, perhaps. A greater motive yet to be revealed. This feeling followed me like a shadow following my steps, hinting that her words weren't the end of the story, but merely the first crack of a much deeper truth yet to come. The emptiness between us began to spread through the house like a thick fog. I would wake in the early hours and walk the dark hallways, feeling every wall hold echoes of what was unsaid. There was a strangeness in every small detail. The dish left in the sink, the slammed door, the overly controlled tone of voice. They were signs that something was moving in the shadows, something I couldn't yet name, but which kept me alert like an animal sniffing for danger in the air. At the same time, there were moments when hope emerged unexpectedly, almost like a provocation. The shy glow of the moon shining through the bedroom curtain, the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the morning, the distant song of a bird that seemed to remind me that the world continued, even when pain tried to imprison me. It was this contrast that tore me apart. Life still insisting on offering me beauty, while death seemed to hover over my own ceiling. I felt divided, as if two versions of myself were silently battling. One, fragile and weary, almost willing to be erased. The other, firm and unyielding, standing tall like a root in dry ground, refusing to yield. This internal battle transformed each day into an invisible battlefield, where I was both victim and warrior. And in this power struggle, I began to see what was truly at risk. It wasn't just my bond with my daughter, nor the pain of rejection. It was my very identity, my entire history, threatened with being reduced to nothing. When someone wishes you away, they're not just killing your body, but trying to erase the memory of everything you were. That thought pierced me like an icy blade. And yet, amidst the cold, there was a subtle but persistent flame burning within me. A silent promise that there was still something to be revealed, something that could transform that suffocating fear into an unexpected strength. I just didn't know when that truth would surface, but the feeling was clear. It was getting closer. I began to notice how her every gesture left marks that lasted beyond the moment. It wasn't just the immediate pain of her words or looks. It was the way my breath became shallow, how my body seemed to prepare for an attack that never came, but was always lurking. Living like this was like walking through a sodden field, where each step sank a little deeper, leaving traces difficult to erase. And yet, within this same uncertain terrain, something new began to emerge. I began to observe more closely, like someone picking up loose pieces of a puzzle. Every detail was a piece that brought me closer to something greater. The sudden silence when I entered the room, the hastily deleted messages, the conversations that ended as soon as my shadow appeared. All of this added up to a growing sense that I wasn't just being rejected. I was being targeted by something more calculated. This awareness brought me a strange mixture of fear and power. Fear because I knew there was a network forming behind me, and power because by realizing this I was no longer blind. It was like seeing for the first time the lines that moved the theater in which I was a character. I silently wondered, how far will someone go to erase the one who gave them life? This question wasn't just for me. It resonates with anyone who has ever felt the weight of ingratitude, the cruelty disguised as normality. Perhaps that's why so many people find the courage to share their own stories, to leave a comment that resonates and says, "I know how it hurts too." The consequences of this awakening began to change my outlook. I no longer saw just a distant daughter, but a silent adversary. Not out of hatred, but out of a need for survival. And this transformation, though painful, planted within me the certainty that something inevitable was coming. Like the distant sound of thunder before a storm, I knew the next move would be no small one. With each passing day, the feeling of being surrounded became clearer. It was like living in a house where the walls seemed to slowly close in, constricting the space, reducing the air. I noticed the simplest details: the rush to lock a drawer, the harsh tone of banal phrases, the muffled sound of footsteps in the wee hours. All of this created an atmosphere of conspiracy, as if my own life had been put on trial without me having the right to defend myself. And yet, in this suffocation, there was something different, a strange lucidity. It was as if the more the world tried to silence me, the more acute my senses became. I could hear the difference between a door that closes carelessly and one that closes with intention. I could sense the all too short pause in an interrupted conversation. Even the scent of an unfamiliar perfume in the hallway made me think of hidden presences, alliances formed in my absence. This lucidity didn't just bring fear. It also offered me a kind of map, albeit an incomplete one. I began to see patterns, to imagine connections I hadn't dared to make before. A game was underway, and even though I was tired, I could no longer pretend I couldn't see the board. But there was still the other side of this awakening: uncertainty. Because seeing signs isn't the same as knowing the truth. And this distance between suspicion and certainty was a dangerous space, an abyss that could swallow me if I took a false step. It was in this space that I walked every day, oscillating between the hope of discovery and the fear of what would be revealed. The nights grew longer in this state of wakefulness. The clocks ticking, repeated and insistent, sounded like a cruel reminder that time was running out. I lay down, but I didn't rest. My body was present, but my mind was always alert, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed missing essential pieces. And it was in this accumulated fatigue, in this unrelenting tension, that I realized something was about to emerge from the darkness. It wouldn't be just another insult, nor just a look of contempt. It would be something bigger, definitive, capable of forever changing the way I saw my own story. The certainties I thought I held began to dissolve like ink in water. With each detail I discovered, a new layer of uncertainty emerged, as if reality were made of overlapping veils, hiding what truly mattered. It was a play of light and shadow. Sometimes I felt I was about to touch the truth, and then it slipped away, disappearing into a space of doubt. The days grew too long, and the nights even crueler. There were times when I walked through the dark room and the reflection of my face in the window frightened me. It wasn't just the image of a weary woman, but of someone carrying within her a secret yet to be revealed. I wondered if this secret was mine or if it had been set upon me like a trap. This feeling intensified whenever the silence was broken by strange noises. A muffled laugh behind the door, the quick sliding of a drawer as it closed, the jingle of keys I didn't recognize. They were fragments of a narrative I couldn't yet piece together, but which kept me in a constant state of alert. And yet, within this darkness, there were glimmers of clarity, like when the sun manages to pierce a dense cloud and momentarily illuminate a gray landscape. In those moments, I remembered who I was before all this, how I'd faced pain that seemed unbearable and still survived. This memory gave me strength, but it also heightened the contrast with the uncertainty surrounding me. I teetered between confidence that I could endure and doubt that perhaps I was being led toward an inevitable fate. Each step felt weighted, as if I were walking a tightrope over a deep abyss, trying to balance hope in one hand and fear in the other. And the further I went, the more I felt something hidden was about to be revealed. A detail, a piece of evidence, a gesture that would completely change the course of my story. This feeling was so strong it seemed to breathe with me, accompanying me at every moment. I just didn't know when it would surface, but I sensed it was closer than ever. And then, just as the weight seemed about to crush me, something inside me opened like an unexpected window in a dark room. It was as if I could suddenly breathe a different air, lighter, firmer, an air that reminded me that I am not only made of the wounds I carry, but also of the strength that has always been hidden in silence. I realized that all the fear, all the pain were not just signs of weakness. They were the rough steps that pushed me here, to this moment where I can look forward and see a different path. The images come back in waves. My little daughter running around the room, her tiny hands holding mine, the sound of her laughter filling the space. These memories break me, but they also strengthen me because they show me that nothing was in vain. Even the deepest roots may twist and bruise, but they remain alive, nourishing something that can still flourish. And it is in this contrast that I find myself now. Between conquest and challenge, between learning and surprise. Conquest because I survived the weight of rejection. Challenge because I know the battle is not over. Learning because I discovered strengths within myself that I had never known. Surprise because I realized that even pain can be an invitation to rebirth. The rhythm inside me has changed. It's no longer the racing heart of fear, but the steady rhythm of someone who knows they're standing tall, even if the wind tries to push them. It's at this point that many feel the urge to leave their mark, to like, comment, and subscribe, because they recognize that this isn't just my story. It's a reflection of so many others that deserve to be heard. And in arriving here, I realized that true victory isn't just silencing those who wished me dead, but proving to myself that I'm still capable of starting over. I carry the scars like silent medals, reminding me that kindness isn't weakness, and silence isn't surrender. Those who have followed every step of this journey know there is a privilege in witnessing the transformation of someone who refuses to disappear. And it is with this certainty that I conclude, leaving a truth engraved in the air. When they try to extinguish our light, it is precisely in that moment that we learn to shine even brighter.